Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hero Movie Podcast, your greatest source for superhero movie discussions in the multiverse. And I'm joined by sweet Shazzy Kovacs from the internet.
Dick Tracy, huh?
Yep, Dick Tracy. And of course, as you just heard, Bruce Leslie is not here this week. But that's okay. It was actually at his request. He kind of wanted another week off, and we were like, "Oh, let's go ahead and give it to him." The boy's been he's been working really hard, while me and Sean have kind of been I don't want to say slacking off, because we've certainly been doing much work, but not the kind of work that boy's been putting in. So we give Bruce a week off this week, because this week we're talking to my good buddy from the Film Find, Matt Smith, about Dick Tracy. Matt, what's up, man?
You guys know that I'm always here to talk about Dick.
He's all about it, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of those double entendres throughout the rest of the programming, so just jump on board for that one, kids. Even though this movie, I was amazed to remember that this is a PG-rated film. I was shocked about that.
Wow. Is it really? It's just PG?
Yeah.
PG, and was heavily marketed to children.
Oh, for sure.
I do remember that.
I mean,
heavily. I went to see it in theaters when I was a kid. So.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, me too.
So we'll talk about that real quick, in just a moment, rather. But first and foremost, we do want to say a big giant thank you to everyone who helps support this show over at patreon.com/HMP. There you get the pre-show, post-show, and of course a Dinger Zone. And for those of you that have been following so far, we are almost halfway through, or almost a quarter of the way. I'm bad with math. This is number 3. We're doing Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift this week, and
we're a third of the way through.
A third of the way. There you go. See, math, kids. I didn't learn it, but you probably should. So we're doing that. Keep on board, patreon.com/HMP, and we really thank all of you fine folks. And do remember that when you do that, you also get to choose a movie that we watch, and you'll be choosing that in just over a week. So get on board, man. Help yourself out here. So let's get into it, boys. This week we are covering from 1990. Here's the trailer for Dick Tracy.
When it's time to fight crime.
Calling Dick Tracy. Calling Dick Tracy.
He's your man.
Tracy.
Tracy?
Do you mind if I call you Dick?
Okay, boys, let's go.
Extra! Tracy Bell's mom!
Come on, Tracy, take me with you.
You're under arrest.
I want more.
You got a name?
Kid.
Kid?
Kid.
Walt Disney Pictures presents Warren Beatty
Make a note, Pat. They waived their right to a phone call.
as Dick Tracy.
Aren't you gonna frisk me? No, that's what I call a dame.
I think Tracy drives you crazy, doesn't he?
When do we get Dick Tracy?
Everywhere I turn, it's Tracy! Tracy! Tracy!
This summer,
Tracy, look out!
he's coming to a theater near you.
I'm on my way.
Dick Tracy.
Alrighty, that was the trailer for Dick Tracy from 1990. Here's the IMDb plotline. As we know, IMDb always 100% correct in everything they say and or do. The comic strip detective finds his life is vastly complicated when Breathless Mahoney makes advances towards him while he's trying to battle Big Boy Caprice's united mob. Like I said, this is 1990, rated PG, from Warren Beatty, of all people. Not only stars in the movie, but directs as well. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, wait a minute. We don't have Bruce here. How are we going to do that comic book connection? Well, I got a little bit of news for you, kids. Our little guest here, Matt Smith, it's not just coincidence that he's here. He's got a reason. So I'll dub over the correct name in post. Don't worry.
It's time for Bruce's comic book connection.
What an excellent job in post you did, Adam. Pat yourself on the back. You're a hero. Matt, you know a little something about Dick Tracy, no?
I do, and I'm not quite Bruce, so I've got bullet points, not a full script. I know he types everything out, but basically, here's Dick Tracy, y'all. It was created in 1931 by Chester Gould. The strip was heavily inspired by his experiences at the time as a journalist, writing about the gangsters in the Chicagoland and Upper Midwest area. So the city in Dick Tracy, which is all it's ever referred to, is technically Chicago. Mostly he was inspired in storylines by Al Capone and John Dillinger. What's interesting about Dick Tracy and his place in comic book history is also what's interesting about its place more generally in cultural history. It is widely considered the first police procedural. Now, there was detective fiction before this, stemming out of like Edgar Allan Poe and stuff like that. But this is really the first time that you're focused on a police detective going through the processes of solving crime. So that's interesting. Gould was also heavily invested in in studying police work and new methods of detection. So what you find in Dick Tracy a lot of the time is the first time that new technologies, things like X-rays, things like fingerprints, things like lie detectors are depicted in popular culture. All of this is happening in the early 1930s in the Dick Tracy strip. Now, if you're a fan of the movie or have seen the movie, the 1940s is really when the strip hits its stride. Gould is churning out story after story at this time that is innovative, unique, and this is also all of the storylines that star his most memorable characters from the Dick Tracy's Rogues Gallery: Flat Top, Itchy, Pruneface, Influence, and so on. This became a trademark of Gould's writing, which was always kind of melodramatic and heavily influenced itself by adventure serial writing in newspapers. And he never plotted things out, which is a weird thing for a comic writer. Usually a serialized strip, even back then, would have weeks and weeks or months and months of plotting done in advance and then drawn to that. Gould improvised almost everything. So 1 week there would be a new villain, and then maybe 3 weeks later that villain might be killed off. He might be go through a storyline that lasted a year. It was really just whatever Gould came up with on the fly. The 1940s is also when Dick Tracy became extremely popular because of this kind of off-the-cuff style of storytelling and the increasingly grotesque villains that were introduced in the strip. In the late 30s, there were a few serials that were produced. The first is Dick Tracy, which starred Ralph Byrd in 1937. It was a 15-part Republic serial. We can do all of these at some point, boys, if you want to. Dick Tracy Returns in 1938, Dick Tracy's G-Men in 1939, and Dick Tracy versus Crime Incorporated in 1941. But what really demonstrates how big Dick Tracy got in the 1940s is that RKO produced 4 feature films starring the character. Beginning in 1945 and 1946, we get Dick Tracy and Dick Tracy versus Cue Ball, Dick Tracy's Dilemma in 1947, and in 1948, probably the most well-known of these movies, Dick Tracy Meets Gruesome, which was mostly popular because it starred an at that point aging Boris Karloff as the gruesome villain. The 1950s and 60s, the strip goes on for a long time, y'all. 1950s and 60s, the popularity really starts to wane a little bit. This is due to a few things. Primarily, it has to do with shifting opinions about the police, especially in the 1960s as they go on. And it's all tied up with the civil rights movement. But if you've ever read the strip, it should be no surprise to anyone that Gould was fairly right-wing in his thoughts about like the rights of prisoners and things like that. Basically, everyone Dick Tracy ever encounters is murdered or gets killed by someone else who is a criminal. So, you know, fairly grim outlook on the subject.
Didn't do it.
But the biggest thing, and this is always the weirdest for people who aren't fans of the strip, is beginning in the late 1950s, Dick Tracy takes a very decidedly science fiction tone, where characters go back and forth constantly to the moon, and there's a moon base. One of the major characters, Moon Girl. Yeah, I know. One of the major characters, Moon Girl, has like a love affair with the kid after he gets older, right? Like it's this really weird. He just became obsessed after the Apollo 11 mission, where they actually land on the moon. almost all of the sci-fi stuff goes away. So I don't know exactly what was going on with Gould there, but it gets really kooky. It's also a very fun section of the strip because you really have no idea what in the hell's going to happen next because it goes bonkers. All of this gets us toward the end of Gould's run on the strip, which lasts all the way until 1977. So 1931 to 1977, he writes this thing and draws it daily for 46 years.
Jeez.
Okay. And at that point, it was taken over by Max Allan Collins, who wrote Road to Perdition, another comic book movie that everybody can listen to an episode of HMP about. But Gould died in 1985, and this movie had been kicked around Hollywood with a number of different directors originally attached to it. Warren Beatty ultimately picked it up. He was able to snag the rights. And I'm sure we can talk about this more, but he still holds the rights to this day with quote unquote plans to make a sequel. So that's our little comic book connection. Hugely influential strip that kind of lost its way as it went on, but you can still read new stories today. It still gets published.
That's wild. I mean, I didn't realize how, absolutely prolific the character's been for this long. I mean, I knew it was a long time, but not to this level, to where it's kind of even still more or less going up to today, right?
Yeah, there's a creative team that makes a strip every single day.
That's wild.
Significantly fewer newspaper publications, however, than the 1940s.
Now, this is 1990, and I think... You tell me what you guys think about this, but I think this is probably peak Warren Beatty. And I say that not because this is, the height of whatever, but I think that only he could pull off everything like we're seeing on the screen right now. Only would somebody that had that high of a level of star, who was just allowed to do whatever he wanted, would have made this movie. I think that's only capable by somebody as nutty and insane as Warren Beatty is.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of bold choices made in this. I saw this in the movie theater at the time. I was a kid at the time, and I was very much looking forward to it, even though I had no reference. I didn't read the comic strip growing up. I didn't know anything about Dick Tracy except for just the iconography. The watch on his wrist, and he can talk into it. The yellow hat, the square jaw. That's about all I knew. And then when this movie came out, as a kid, I remember thinking, this movie wants very desperately to be Batman. Yes. And I mean, this movie suffers greatly from Batman envy, which is fine and very much a sign of the times. But watching it this week, I really kept thinking to myself, one, they would never give him the money to make this movie now, but I would very, very much like to see Warren Beatty now playing this character now without all of the Batman-ness to this, because it is stylized. It is a very, very strange movie. And there is something that is very, very problematic watching this movie, which is that every single person in this movie is white. And that is a massive, massive problem, and something that they would never allow today.
Now, Matt, let me ask you, where did they kind of, what was the...
No, go ahead, Adam.
What was the kind of racial divide in the comics and stuff? Because I know you've read a lot of the actual strip over, all these years and everything. How was that comparative to
I think you just cut out while you were asking part of that question, but the strip is overwhelmingly white. And I think that's a reflection of Gould's worldview in a certain way. Like there are minorities early on. They're very offensive, like almost minstrelsy. Kind of stuff. Not entirely unlike early the Spirit strips, right? Where there's like the cab driver and all that stuff. But yeah, there's not a lot of diversity in the Dick Tracy world. I do think that would look different on film now, and that would change a little bit. But I think in 1989, when they were actually making the film to be released in the summer of 1990, that was primarily not on anyone's mind.
Right.
I mean, part of the reason that this movie had stuck around for so long and taken so long to get made was similar to the same problem that Batman originally faced, which is that for 30 years, superhero movies were thought of as not profitable, even though there were massively successful superhero movies periodically. And comic book movies in general suffered that same perception. So really what pushed this movie into being actually being produced and being made is that Beatty picked up the rights, and it so happened that Batman was a huge hit, and Disney wanted to reflect that.
Yeah, I think one of the big reasons that this movie was as successful as it was, well, a couple of things here. First and foremost is that the budget for this thing was $47 million in 1990 money, which is insane.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
it grossed something like 4 times that, and it was a disappointment to Disney.
Yeah, 162 million
Batman
worldwide. That's true. But if this came out like 2 years before Batman, this would have changed something, because the Batman really was that watershed moment, going in from the late 80s to the early 90s there, that really took superhero movies in a bigger leap than we'd gotten with the Superman films in the past. It was kind of the next evolutionary jump. This could have been that had it come out like 2 years earlier, but at the same time, I don't think that we would be getting this same sort of movie had Burton's Batman not come out.
And I don't know that even with Beatty, you would have gotten everyone that's in this movie involved in it, right? Like, I mean, part of why this cast is there is Beatty, but part of it is also that Jack Nicholson had made one, and so it kind of gave the green light for people in that generation of actor to be like, yeah, I'll make a comic book movie.
I think about it that way. Yeah, but that makes sense. It's like, oh, this guy that we all know, we all kind of came up with and everything. Why not us too? And the wild thing is that of all the people and everything that are in here, we don't necessarily celebrate them per se, because the majority of them are just caked up with makeup and fancy, crazy outfits that you don't like. I mean, this is the first time, and I watched this movie a lot as a kid. I guess I never really read the credits. We didn't have IMDb or nothing back in the day. This is the first time I realized Dick Van Dyke was in this film. And I was like, he's actually so good that he just disappears into that role. He doesn't have a big role, mind you, but it doesn't feel like Dick Van Dyke is behind that mustache and glasses.
Yeah. I mean, the only character I feel like feels like the person that is playing them is Big Boy.
Yeah,
and I think it's because of the stereotype that probably came after this Pacino performance, really. But
it is funny, man. Watching this movie, I was like, "Oh, this role informed Pacino's performances from this point forward."
Yeah, he just didn't have the big makeup on. He designed by himself, by the way. That's not a real character from the strip. It's like a combination of different characters. There is a Big Boy, but he dies like in the first year of the strip. But Big Boy Caprice was a whole invention for this movie, and he designed that makeup to like fit into the world like Pacino did.
What I love about Pacino in this role is he is giving it 1,000%. He's not making fun of anything. He is like, this is like he's treating this like he treated Godfather, man. He is just going after like in a bigger and broader way, of course, but he is going after his role 1,000%. And God, I love it. It's so insane, but it's so good at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he kind of nails the tone of what the strip is like. And this is, I think, what people who don't like this movie tend to think, like there's no defining tone to it or that it's too all over the place. That is exactly what reading the strip is like. I just want to like make that very clear. Like literally within panels, Gould would switch from like absurd over the top comedy to ultra violence to just like the most sincere schmaltzy melodrama, and it would be the same day's strip sometimes. So, if there's a criticism of this movie, that might be it. It's also entirely accurate to what the strip was.
So, Matt, you clearly have a love for Dick Tracy. But
yeah.
How are you on the movie?
I think it's mostly pretty good. I think one thing that it tries to do is just like throw too much into one movie. So it does lose its focus, which in a strip is different, because in the strip you can just, the next day return to the thing that you need to deal with in a different way, or in a much longer method, or end it and be done with it. But here, there's such a rich rogues gallery in Dick Tracy history. Like half of the major characters that and then there were action figures and trading cards they're killed off in the opening scene, the cold open, right?
And I will try my best. I think I can dig around my dad's comic card collection, and yes, that's a thing. He's got it's ridiculous how many comic book cards the man has. But I think I've got that Dick Tracy set in there somewhere. I'm going to post that up on the Hero Movie podcast Instagram page.
88 of them plus the 12 stickers.
There you go.
Are you putting that on the Reddit? Or are you on the subreddit? Or are you putting
I'll do all of it, and I'll talk about that at the end of the show. But yeah, so check out all that.
So I think if there's one big thing that I don't like about the movie, is that it does a lot with just the hour and 40 minutes that it has, and some of that kind of lessens how rich the world actually is. You kind of get this very narrowly focused, singular thing that's happening.
But it looks gorgeous. I mean, you can tell, this is back in the day where, there's a couple of matte paintings to be sure, but everything is built. Everything is built in this movie. I mean, you can tell where that $47 million is, because they made a billion things.
Oh yeah, there's no on location shooting in Chicago in this movie at all.
No, they're clearly out of backlot.
Yeah.
But just I just love the fact that they decided, let's just paint everything in just these wild primary, comic book colors, the 6 colors or whatever it is. It's such an interesting style that almost feels like it couldn't even be made today with our, devoid everything of color and fun.
It's also the cinematographer, I forget his name. If you have the IMDb up, you can look at it. But he'd worked with a lot of people on a lot of big movies, including things like Apocalypse Now. And I don't think he was the DP, but he definitely did photography.
Vittorio Storaro. It's an Italian name.
Yeah, of course. Well, of course, if he's going to work with Coppola, right?
Yeah.
So the movie does look just amazing. I mean, the color palette is straight out of the comic books, or out of the strip. And it is nice to see a movie that is based on a comic book that looks comic booky. It's one of the nice things about the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is that's a recognizable color palette to me. It's not dreary old, let's desaturate everything and make it look like it's an oppressive fascist state. Even though that might have been what Gould wanted.
Yeah, but we only had so much to work with. But there is something that gets down to the iconography and symbology of all of it, just having it be that straightforward and simple as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I was very much enjoying this movie. Everyone's hamming it up.
Mm-hmm.
I like the very bold choices being made, but then it comes to an absolute screeching halt with Madonna. The second we get to Madonna, it loses a little bit of its action to me. And
I think, yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say that, you have all of these people who are in on it, okay, this is the style of movie we're going for, but no one bothered to tell Madonna what they were doing. And so you have this one character who is basically at the same level of acting as the child actor in this movie. There are basically the same level where, I just had such a problem with Madonna. I still do, just because of her as a person, she's terrible. But I watching her in this completely just slammed the brakes on this movie for me.
So I have a couple of thoughts, and I do think that's a fair critique of the movie. That storyline really kind of both comes out of nowhere and ends things from moving along apace, as it were.
Right.
But I will say too, like, yet again, that is something that the strip does very frequently, especially concerning Tracy's relationships with, and that's his name, by the way, is just Dick Tracy. It's not that he is a dick and like a detective and his last name is Tracy. His name is Dick.
Richard Tracy.
But anyway, it's not even Richard. It's constantly just Dick Tracy. Anyway, so the depictions of Tracy and his relationships with women always slow the strip down. Especially when it really gets into like the action-oriented gangster plot part of it. The other thing that I think, it's fair to acknowledge here as part of that critique is there's a reason that Madonna's in this movie, and it's that she was banging Warren Beatty at the time.
Right.
So,
right.
Sorry for the
let's
kids. I did.
No, it's fine.
You're fine. Let's be honest. Let's be honest here. If you were an adult female from anywhere from the early 70s till about like maybe like 92, the chances that you saw that you and Warren Beatty had relations are very good.
Yeah, probably. The man got around to touch. Supposedly, what was it? What was the gal who was Sean Young was supposed to be in this film in the what's her face role, not Madonna's role, but the other role, and I guess they were like, nope. She says that he wouldn't sleep with me. That's why he fired me off. And you're like, that probably checks out.
Yeah.
With Warren, I could believe that. Normally, you'd go, Sean Young's a crazy person. She says a lot of stuff that you don't know. Well, that one's probably true, though.
Yeah, equally crazy Warren Beatty. They're both nuts.
Oh, no, that's absolutely. But I think, like I said, because he was at this height of his power and everything, is that he could pull this off. And I don't know who else you could give this to. Some of the trivia that I read, so they thought about even giving this to Burton at some point. And speaking of Tim Burton, you've got Dan, the composer. Danny Elfman. There, my gosh, my brain just took a nap there. You got Danny Elfman, who did the Batman score, doing this score, so it sounds like a lot of Batman cues that he didn't quite use or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does sound that way.
But it also, at the same time, too, when he was asked about it, Danny Elfman said, Warren's crazy. Like, that's a quote. So,
that's funny.
Makes sense to me.
I will say, I don't know at what point my connection dropped off a minute ago, but I will say the Danny Elfman inclusion does feel a little bit like the studio coming up with a solution to a problem that they were already faced with. Like, Beatty asked Sondheim to do the score as well as the songs, but he didn't want to do the score. And I think Danny Elfman was brought in kind of last minute.
Yeah.
And probably at the direction of the studio wanting something that was more Batman-like. So I think there's a reason behind all of that. Not to mention the obvious fact that like most Danny Elfman scores before like 2005 all sound like Danny Elfman scores.
Yeah, it's true.
It was one of those. He was definitely one that you could always hear and just go like 4 seconds in, you're like, Danny Elfman. That's a Danny Elfman track. I know it because I can hear it. It's super. Yeah. It's like that.
There's a clarinet and an oboe.
Bing. That's it. Some really quick, little melody that winds up really, really fast all of a sudden. Yeah. All right. There's Danny Elfman again there for you. I like Madonna in this, though. Again, this was another, like, she was, again, like Warren Beatty at that time, kind of height of her powers and everything. And I think she understands who she is and kind of, especially at that particular time, who she was always kind of portraying, which is obviously your kind of Marilyn Monroe type and everything. And playing that sort of, femme fatale sort of role in this movie, it kind of works. It totally works. And I'll tell you this much, even at, what was it? So 1990, what am I, 9 or 8 or 9? Even young Adam was just like, I like the way this movie looks. And so, but so I'm not going to say that doesn't cloud my memory to some degree or another. But I thought she did really well for what she was doing in this.
Yeah, I think she's fine personally, but I do understand the criticism of it.
Oh man, if you had a somebody who had like the gear in that role, I think this is a vastly different movie. You know, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help that there's that voice modulation that she has, where she sounds like Princess Leia's alter ego when she's Bausch.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. I feel like that was 1,000% on purpose. Modulation. Exact same. It just felt like they were like straight up calling it out. Like, we're not even playing. Like, you know what this is, and by the time that you see the reveal, you're like, well, yeah, that's how Leia sounded.
Yeah, dealing with carbonite sickness.
I also think that part of it is just like, she is, as the secondary female lead, she's up against Glenn Headley, who was like really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, she really is like just an amazing actress. Like, she nominated for a bunch of Emmys and stuff like that, right? A big theater actor. Everybody knew her from like at that time, I guess Dirty Rotten Scoundrels was the big thing.
Yeah.
But like, you're up against somebody who's actually a very talented actress as the competing female lead, and in contrast, your performance will not look good. It'd be like you could take a very good TV actress and you put them into a movie with Meryl Streep, and Meryl Streep's probably acting circles around them.
Let's talk about some of the craziness of the makeup and the people that are wearing the makeup.
Can we talk about Glenn Headley a little bit more?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't want to.
Because one of the things that I really enjoy about her performance is that she is doing that like 40s damsel thing where like her voice is very high, but she's also at the same time a real person. Which she's walking a tightrope with this character, and she's doing a really, really great job. And on top of that, she's acting alongside Warren Beatty, who Warren Beatty's Warren Beatty. He has
Charisma,
no range to him. He's just Warren Beatty.
Yeah.
And she's able to give him stuff to do because her performance is so good.
Yeah. She's great here.
She is the best part. Her and I have a soft spot for Warren Beatty just because I grew up in that era, and so I like Warren Beatty. One of my favorite movies is Heaven Can Wait. I absolutely adore that movie, and so seeing him in this, and watching him in Heaven Can Wait, I can see he's not the best actor in the world. He's just handsome and he has charisma. But he's not he's not someone who you're like, we're hanging everything on this Warren Beatty guy. Like, he's not that guy.
Yeah.
So having her performance is so good that she helps him act. That's how good she is in this role.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Both in the assessment of Beatty as an actor, who I think gets by, like I said, almost completely on his charisma and watchability on screen. Like, he's very handsome, and you are interested to know what that guy's doing. But a lot of what makes him work is how he's able to play off of other people who are really doing the work.
Right.
But yeah, like, she is just so great at being a generous actor, I think is the term for it. Right?
Yes.
Where she's not just hamming it up like the other people or like finding her own stuff to do, but also like even when she's playing with Charlie Corsmo, the kid, right? The Hook kid. She's she's like also like giving him stuff, right? So their scenes actually together, like when they're walking back with the ice cream and she chucks the ball into the like all of that plays differently than any other scene that Charlie Corsmo has in this movie with Tracy or any other character.
Yeah,
and I
completely.
think that's all Headley.
And in him as like you said, you brought up the kid there. He was one of those people that I thought like, oh, he was in a billion things, right? No, he's only in like 7 things or something. Then he stopped acting altogether and is now like some big time, lawyer or whatever.
But those 7 things are so huge that
I mean, when you've got Dick Tracy that makes $1 gajillion, and then you've got Hook, you're in a Steven Spielberg movie for crying out loud in 1992. How could your life be any bigger and better from that point? Oh my word!
What about Bob?
Yeah, exactly. And another one, and you just started with a comedy legend and a drama legend who's also does some comedy stuff. It's like, come on, wow! I was like, at that point, you have to retire because what else could you really do? Everything else would look like garbage. You want to go, sit on like L.A. Mines or some such nonsense? No, thank you.
He did come back in 1998. He made a movie called Can't Hardly Wait.
That's right.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
And that's really it was like he did Hook, and then he waited until high school and made a high school movie and pieced out for another little while.
Good for him. Good for him.
He still looks the same when you see adult pictures of him. You're like, oh, yeah, you're that kid from Dick Tracy, but you look weird now because you're that kid from Dick Tracy.
He's also like one of those, because there's like a handful of them, and I think, Matt, you'll know who I'm kind of talking about here. There's that one kid, he's like the requisite little kid in like 8 billion horror flicks. Maybe he was in like, Nightmare on Elm Street 7 or something like that. He was in like that, just that one, just brown-haired kid who's like in just every horror film ever. There's all these kinds of people, and I for sure I thought he was one of those, but he was only in just those handful of things. But they were so memorable that he's locked in there for good. Good on you, buddy. Get yourself a bit of pop culture history, and then just move on, so you don't have to deal with the rest of it.
Parents did a great job too, man. I mean, his parents,
like
he's.
We
don't even know that kid's name. He's in 3 of the biggest movies of the mid '80s. I mean, he did good.
Yeah,
mid '90s.
Got him to go to school, and that's that.
Yeah, if I was his like on-set teacher and stuff like that, I would really be pointing that out. You see, we get a lot of crap from everybody about how we're not teaching these kids really well, and they don't have a good, well-rounded education. This is one we taught. Look at him. Look at him. He's working for the White House and stuff or whatever because he's done that kind of stuff. He's insane.
Right.
It's pretty cool. But yeah, so let's talk about a couple of the other people that I was completely surprised were in this. First and foremost, William Forsythe.
Yeah.
William Forsythe, like, first of all, at 10 years old, I don't know who that is at this point, and obviously his career's gone, in a particular direction after this movie for sure. But man, he is so good in this.
Yeah. And he also is playing like probably the most recognizable Dick Tracy villain.
Yeah, for Flat Top, for those of you that don't remember.
Yeah. Who like really was, I mean, he's probably the most popular of the villains, and he really has a key role in this movie. And it's one of the few characters in the Rogues Gallery that I think really gets justice done to him. Although they change around his story, like the plot in the comic strip kind of is a little more tragic than this.
Let me guess, something fell on top of his head.
No. I mean, there's no explanation ever for people. Like, there's a guy later in the series in the 60s called the Pouch, and let me tell you about what his deformity is. He has a giant pouch in his neck. All right, like, this is what we're talking about here. But yeah, he's really good as Flat Top and actually gets stuff to do, unlike some of the other villains. It's basically like him and Pruneface and Itchy get all of the stuff. Mumbles gets a little bit because he's Dustin Hoffman. You got to let him do something. But yeah.
So yeah, that's the next one, man. Dustin Hoffman is Mumbles. Holy crap! There's just, first of all, and again, I can't imagine how all of these guys are just like, yes, I will be my high-profile actor self. I will go and take a small part in this movie, and you're going to dress me how, so no one knows what I look like, so much makeup, no one's going to be able to recognize me. And in Dustin Hoffman's case, I'm going to mumble so much, you're not even going to know that it's me.
Yeah. Well, I have not read that much about the background of the movie to know like what anybody was paid or anything like that. But I do have to say that all of this is probably a combination of the fact that it's Beatty and, him being of that generation and people liking him and doing favors.
Yeah.
As well as like, just like all of these people at this point would have grown up reading Dick Tracy. There was a cartoon show. There were movies that would have been on television constantly in the 50s and 60s, right? So, I think part of it also is they probably, some of them have an affinity for the material anyway, right? Just as something they remember as a kids. And since they're making it for Disney and it's this big primary colored thing, it's a kids movie, right? It's the Bill Murray, why'd you make Garfield? Well, my kid said, or, my kid wanted a Garfield movie or something.
Yeah, something stupid like that. And you're just like, all right, fine, whatever.
All right, whatever.
Somebody asked me, and the zeros on the check looked nice, so I was like, well, I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
But then again, you also have Oscar winner Paul Sorvino coming up and looking like a big mouth bass.
Uh-huh. You also get like the guy who plays Prune Face is R.G. Armstrong.
Oh yeah,
and R.G. Armstrong was in probably dozens of westerns in the 1950s and 60s. He made a ton of southern exploitation movies. He was in, I think it was either White Lightning or the sequel Gator.
I think he's a White Lightning.
I think it's White Lightning, but with Burt Reynolds, like they were buddies. And he is almost unrecognizable in the prune face makeup.
Yeah.
So it's like you look at it long enough and you can kind of see it, but my God, just like one of the great character actors from just dozens and dozens of low budget movies. And he's just here on screen.
I like to say that he's got that he's got the Rick Dalton career. Now we can use that and people know what we're talking about.
Yeah,
because
man, that's
they've
a
seen
great
the film.
way of describing it.
But he's got that Rick Dalton career where he just kind of like played that little Western guy all the time and then kind of graduated up, did some other new different things every now and then.
Yeah.
Definitely one of those dudes. He's awesome in this. And again,
he's
the
in Predator too, right?
I think so. One of them, if at least. What was the other one? Seymour Cassell, another fantastic just character actor that you see in there. I of course mentioned Dick Van Dyke, that like I didn't even know was in this movie until this viewing because he hides behind that character so well. It's so much fun.
The character that looking over the crew list that I didn't even recognize her this time is Kathy Bates is in this movie.
Oh yeah. Yep. Most people don't recognize her as the court reporter, Miss Green.
Yeah, I didn't know. I just saw this thing. I didn't know it was her.
Yeah, I didn't either. But the like, and that's what I love about this movie too, is that it knows what it's being as far as this comedic sort of stuff. That's just he's mumbling and she's like, I don't know what to type on. Like it's so good. But they don't make a big deal out of it either, which is also something that's nice, is that it doesn't feel like, while everything is done with a very much winkful eye to the audience and everything, it's not done like, hey, look at that, look at how funny we are. It doesn't feel like that, at least.
It's not the Brady Bunch movie.
Exactly. Yeah, no one's going. They took it seriously while still giving a wink.
One of the things that I read about this is that Gene Hackman was supposed to be in this movie, and once he learned that Warren Beatty was not just starring in it but was also directing it, he said no, thank you, because he was in Reds with them.
Yeah.
He's like, I am never working on another show where Warren Beatty's the director.
If he's in charge, no way. If he asked me to do it as an actor, whatever.
Yeah, and the thing is too, it's funny because it's not their first rodeo, Reds. So like they'd worked together previously at that point, so they were still just like, Listen, I've worked with Warren enough to know that that's not where I'm going to go.
Yeah,
no,
I'm not going to work under him anymore. Not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like we've been there several times around, and I think I'm starting to notice a bit of a trend.
There's something great about Gene Hackman. His name comes up all the time on the show, Matt, because I love him. I think Adam loves him.
Oh, yeah.
Bruce seems to be a little indifferent towards him, but like there's just something really like he was an old man when he was 30.
Yeah.
And so, he's just cantankerous this entire time.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, if he doesn't say anything, that he's not having a good time on a thing,
Yep.
And then, he's really pissed off if he says something like, I will never work with Warren Beatty again. There's something so nice about it. I hate this movie so much. I'm quitting acting and I'm moving to Arizona.
Yeah, I'll turn 80 and everybody will go, "Where are you, Gene Hackman? Come back one more time." And I will say no. And you're like, "Oh, come on, dude." But again, another awesome one that was in here that, like, I guess because there's just so much stuff going on screen in this entire movie. This is the first time I realized James Caan was in this too. I'm like, James Caan's even in this? Holy smokes.
Yeah, I mean, what's funniest too about watching all of this like parade of character actors and big stars kind of mixed together is there's at the beginning of the movie a very long sequence of names in order of appearance.
Oh, yeah.
And half of them are not in that because they're not big enough contractual roles. So you just see people pop up and you're like, wait a minute, this person, really?
It's quite insane. So let's talk a little bit about like the actual kind of history with this movie and everything. Came out obviously successful, but obviously also not to the Batman level of successful and everything. But Matt, tell us a little bit about like kind of how the rights for this sort of thing works, because Beatty still owns the rights in some measure. How does he get around all that?
Well, it's actually hilarious, and I don't think the last time I looked into this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I don't think anything has changed. I think he still completely owns the rights. Basically, he has to every so often just make it look like he's going to produce a sequel. Right? In order to retain the rights. Like, as long as it's a quote in active pre-production or whatever, they don't revert back to the Tribune Syndicate, which was the newspaper syndicate that owns the strip and all the rights to it. So basically, since 1990, Beatty has been trying to get a sequel made, although now, I don't know what his role would be. Just producer, probably, maybe director. But the way he gets around this is, apparently, in order for a sequel to be in pre-production, all he has to do is occasionally show up for an interview dressed in the duster and the hat.
This is the most insane part, I think, is that he's got to dress up.
So, like, he will just, like, and it won't even be like television or whatever, right? He'll show up and do an interview with, like, I don't know, Vanity Fair or something, just on background. And he'll wear, like, the hat and the duster.
And be in quote in character.
Yeah,
correct.
Because he's wearing the costume.
Yeah,
he is promoting an eventual sequel for the film. I don't know that this type of contract would fly in 2020, year of our Lord.
Oh, you think?
But clearly, back in 1988. Superhero and comic book movies were not important enough for them to care that much about like what active development meant. So as far as I know, Dick, he still has the rights solely for himself, which I just find hilarious. Like, just randomly, like, you're interviewing Warren Beatty, and then one day he just shows up in his duster. Like,
and that's how the Vanity Fair article
Dick Tracy
starts.
for 5 seconds.
He's like, Warren Beatty walked into the room, but curiously in a in a yellow hat and jacket. No one knows why.
What's funny is, like, it doesn't make it into the profiles of anything, but like, if you ask people who've interviewed Warren Beatty, like, you will find people who've just done random ass interviews where he's in a yellow coat. Which just seems crazy to me. Just crazy.
and maybe it may I'm subscribing to Jackass Quarterly when I say this to you, but I that Dick Tracy 8-minute thing that he made a couple of years ago is one of those like chaser movies that you hear about but no one's ever seen before. It's along that same level as Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly,
Right.
like where it exists but no one's seen it.
Right. Yeah, I don't. It's one of the weirdest stories in Hollywood. Honestly, is how he does this.
Oh,
and he's been sued over it multiple times. So, like he still has them. So there must be something in that contract that is just like, ironclad.
My guess
is the dude who owns Batman. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly.
He walks up, he goes, "Judge, can I approach the bench?" He walks up, gives a little smile and everything, and the judge is like, "Oh, shucks, it's Warren Beatty. You just do whatever you want, Mr. Beatty. I don't care."
Uh-huh.
It's
I think so I just looked it up. The last time he was sued was 2011, and it was ruled in his favor. So Beatty still owns the rights.
Man,
nice.
That sucker's good, boy. I do want to quickly point out, like, one thing I do love about this movie is clearly the entire, almost the entire third act is dubbed later. They were just like, oh gosh, there is nothing going on here. We got to get Al in here. He's going to do a lot of ADR lines just talking about this, that, and the other, because you never see his mouth moving, but they're always in shadows. They were like, man, the music is not holding up here. We got to have some dialogue in this bad boy. There's so much ADR in this movie. It's nuts.
There's also that really weird part where Big Boy is in rehearsals with Breathless Mahoney, and it goes on for like 5 minutes of him telling her what she needs to be doing.
I love that so much.
I do too, but it's clearly not in the script.
No.
Clearly.
I want more. Come on, everybody. We're doing the thing. And he's getting into the dance and everything with them to where at the final number, more. He's just dancing. Wrong. It's all wrong. Oh my God. It's so great. I love this stupid movie. But before we get to our review here and everything, our final scores, we do have to ask ourselves one very important question, and it is how this movie relates back 1-to-1 with the most magnanimous man in Hollywood history, Sylvester Stallone.
Why, thank you, Adam. I have a prepared statement. R.I.P. Michael J. Pollard. You might have died in 2019, but you'll always be remembered for your awesome character performances, specifically as Mr. Mxyzptlk in the Superboy TV show, still the best live-action version of that character to this day. You played Herman and Scrooged, of course, Bug Bailey and Dick Tracy. Do you guys remember when you could be weird-looking and still work in movies? Michael J. Pollard had a 40-year career, and you saw a bunch of movies he was in, and he was so weird-looking that you'd cross the street if you saw him coming towards you. On our Patreon show, we've been burning through the Fast and the Furious movies, and every female role is played by a Brazilian supermodel. Every role. It's ridiculous. Speaking of bad movies, Michael J. Pollard plays the character Owen in Tango and Cash, a movie that was considered an old concept when it first hit theaters in 1998. Real-life villain John Peters was a producer on that movie, and he fired the director even though they were days away from finishing principal photography. Patrick Swayze was supposed to play Cash, but had to drop out to film Roadhouse. And Barry Sonnenfeld was the original DP on that movie, but Stallone didn't like the way he was being lit and fired him. Stallone fired Barry Sonnenfeld. He didn't think he was good enough at his job.
Jeez.
Barry frickin' Sonnenfeld. The whole thing went $20 million over budget, and there's not a single living soul that claims that Tango and Cash is their favorite movie. And there you have it, HMPers and Dingalingers. This week's Stallone connection is Michael J. Pollard. I'm Sweet Shawnsy from the internet. Spend money on your shoes and your hair. You'll thank me later.
He's not wrong there. Well, over at Hero Movie Podcast, we have our own patented Robin rating system, but here's what I want you to do. We're doing something a little bit different, and I want to invite all of you in to join this exclusive club because it's very early on. I want you to join us over on our new subreddit, reddit.com/r/Hero Movie Podcast. Just look up Hero Movie Podcast if you're on the app or in wherever, and check it out. Join us in there. Pinned up at the top of that page is the Robin rating breakdown. So this is where we really want you guys to go now. We're going to be able to interact with you a heck of a lot more and a lot better than we would over at the Facebook site. So go over to our subreddit. The links are in the description for this podcast and everything. Do that. We'd like to see you there. Spread your memes and your joy and whatever else you got, man. We really appreciate that. That's anywhere on Reddit. Just check out Hero Movie Podcast. And I'll start with myself here on this one. I got to say, I'm happy this is what Bruce chose for us. Not only because we can have Matt on the show in Bruce's absence and get a lot of really in-depth detail and stuff that I'm sure that Bruce could not have he could have done it, but it would have taken him weeks to compile all the information. The kid, he just works too much. This has been a hobby of yours for a while, so it kind of works. But I got to say, I am so happy that we got to see this movie. I'm going Dick Grayson. There's just something about it. I was a kid. I know it's silly, it's stupid, it's kind of over the top, and sometimes that's what you want, man. And I feel like if this would have came out earlier than it did, or conversely much later than it did, it might have had a different reception, despite it even being as successful as it is. But having watched it, I watched it a lot as a kid. I had it on VHS and stuff, so I watched it a decent amount, but I hadn't watched it for well on 15 years at this point. And I got to say, I had a lot of fun, and I wouldn't be opposed to watching it some other time. Not immediately, obviously, but in a little bit. Let's go to you, Sean. What do you got?
This is a movie that I did not revisit. I hadn't seen this, I think, since it came out in the movie theater, to be quite honest with you. I was someone who had very different sensibilities when this movie first came out. And so I did not remember liking it. I like it a whole lot more now. And while there is there are performances that are an issue for me, I think that Glenn Headley is so above and beyond doing such a wonderful job. And I like Warren Beatty. That I'm going to give this a very high Damian Wayne. There's a lot of things in this movie to recommend it. I don't think this movie is for everyone. I think a lot of people who would give this a shot would probably watch this and just absolutely dismiss it, which I think is a mistake. I think there's a lot in this movie. And if you are looking for something a little different, you should see it.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about it on the show so far, but it's not like The Spirit, where they have that kind of throwback thing, but it just doesn't work. Here
it's
it
awful
works
on every level.
Yeah, here it works, and it feels like the people that are involved really, really know what they're doing, Matt, what about you?
I'm going to actually give it a dual rating.
Okay.
Right? So I think on a nostalgia, personal love level, this is Dick Grayson. Okay. I think objectively, thinking about some of the flaws in the film, things that it does get right about the Dick Tracy strip versus not, I think we're looking at like a soft Tim Drake.
Okay. That's still
so Matt, I'm sorry for sidelining you here, Adam. I know that you're on the train ready to head out, but
no, it's all right.
Did this movie
again in just a second? So.
Matt, did this movie inform your love of Dick Tracy, or did you like Dick Tracy and then the movie came out?
I think that it was probably kind of both. Like I had a weird kind of childhood where around this same time that this film came out, so I was like 6, right? I was already listening to like 1930s radio serials with my like grandmother and stuff. So like we'd listen to The Shadow. I had a bunch of Shadow on audio cassette that I would listen to constantly. And I was already watching, like we'd rent from the video store, like the old 30s and 40s serials. Cause I would be with my grandmother and she's like, oh, well, this is in the 1930s. It's safe for you to watch, even though like people are getting thrown off of rooftops and stuff.
The Hays Code says it's okay.
Right. So I think it was probably both, although I don't know at what point I became aware of Dick Tracy. Was the movie first, or was it the strip? But like I definitely remember reading the strip around the same period because it was being published in newspapers still, that we would receive, especially like when we'd go to the beach. They had like whatever Myrtle Beach's newspaper, they'd get that, and Dick Tracy and Spider-Man were always in that, so I always read them.
Right.
Yeah, so it was kind of both, I guess.
The other thing about this, because I am older than you guys, is that this for me was a very disappointing summer. The summer that Dick Tracy came out,
the '90s summer. Yeah,
because to give you an example of what we were in for, my favorite movie of all time is the first Die Hard. I love that movie. I know that that's a big joke now that people love Die Hard, but I loved that movie growing up. I thought it was an amazing movie. Mm-hmm. And the sequel to it, Die Harder, came out this same summer.
Yeah.
And so within the same month, I saw Die Hard 2 and Dick Tracy. And as someone who's, like a kid, right. I was so unbelievably disappointed in both those movies that I was like, summer movies are stupid. I hate them now. And it took me years. It took me years to get back into it again.
Yeah.
Well, and not for nothing, 1989 and 87 through 89 were like some pretty top-notch years when it came to like, big summer films and stuff like that.
Summer movies in particular. Yeah.
So I can understand how that would take a turn. Go ahead.
The one thing I wanted to derail just slightly while we're doing the wrap up is, this movie often gets criticized for being a little over the top and absurd. And I just want to point out that people at the time of the strip's main popularity also were making fun of it. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So like Al Cap and Lil Abner, Lil Abner's favorite comic book, the character Lil Abner had a favorite comic book, and it was called Fearless Fosdick. And Fearless Fosdick was a parody of Dick Tracy. And so like occasionally you'd read a Lil Abner strip and there'd be like 3 or 4 panels that were just parodying Dick Tracy. And it would just be like, absurd violence, square-jawed like protagonist, yeah, all kinds of stuff. So like even that strip at the time was parodying kind of the absurd qualities of the strip. So everybody knew that Dick Tracy was like this over the top, kind of melodramatic crime serial. So everybody's always known that it was over the top and too much.
Yeah, I mean, now that my palate has changed, I enjoy this movie now. I do enjoy watching it.
Yeah, I also 1990 when this came out, I think we have like a different understanding of how campiness and pulp and things can work in different ways in movies that were not typical at the time, especially for summer blockbusters, which, as you pointed out, were probably like a little grittier than this,
But you just had to wait. You had to wait a couple years, and then you got Joel Schumacher to go and straighten it all out for us, and just get us right back on track with the lovely camp of the. Oh wait, anyways, go back and check out our Batman and Robin and what was the third Batman Forever reviews way back.
I also want to throw one more little Fearless Fosdick, Lil Abner thing out there, which is that frequently they would also parody Gould himself in the strip, and the name of the character was Lester Gooch. and the biggest, most popular villain in the Fearless Fosdick strip was Bombface, whose face was a bomb. So, yeah, which always I thought was like wonderfully absurd.
Taking it out of them at every turn, man. So that is it, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Matt, thank you for joining in on this episode, filling in for Bruce and stuff.
Yeah, Matt, this is great. Having a Dick Tracy expert on makes the Dick Tracy thing a lot better. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I will, like I said, always down to talk about Dick.
Well, so tell us, where else might they find some of your work on the internet? Is there a show that somewhere that, like, you know, maybe you and some other jerkwad do that people could listen to? What about that?
You can listen to myself and Adam over on the Film Find.
Oh, that's still a thing.
We're currently recording new episodes. We've taken, you know, periodic weeks off over the past few months, but we have been back fairly regularly. So new episodes coming soon. You can find that wherever podcasts are. You can get them Apple, iTunes. I guess is still a thing. I don't really know. I use Stitcher now.
Stitcher, where are Stitcher money? Come on now. I'm sorry, we had to do that at least once this episode.
Yeah,
Spotify.
Anyway, although whichever one, I don't care. Whoever wants to give me money.
You could also, follow me personally on Instagram if you want. It's Matt_Boyd_Smith. And I periodically post things from the Dick Tracy rereads that I'm doing. So you can follow me over there if you want to.
Get yourself a little bit more of that Dick action. Sean, what else we got out there?
We have a show where we ask 30 questions about a ridiculous television show known as Snowpiercer. It's called Snowpiercer 30 Questions. I very, very much enjoy that show because the TV show itself is ridiculous and fun, and you should watch it. And then as a added bonus, it's like having more because you get to listen to the podcast that has 30 questions about each episode every week.
It's like you just said, no, I'll take 2 scoops of ice cream. Thank you very much. I mean, come on. You can't lose. So check that out, everybody, please. And review us on iTunes and all that kind of good stuff. And again, one big giant thank you to everyone who supports this show over at patreon.com/HMP. Get your pre-show, post-show Dinger Zone with all the Fast and Furious movies going on right now. That is it, everybody. Join us next week for a little something that we're not quite sure yet. So I'm just going to leave it with those words. And stay super, everybody.
Bye, Marty and Evie.